All right, everyone, 7:07 p.m. Central Time. It is session 4. We just had our guest speaker, Guillermo. We're going to get going on the classwork now, and then we'll solve a couple of challenges this evening as well. Excuse me. All right, so tonight we're going to be working with objects, or as JavaScript calls them, object literals. We've already seen these, right? So when we talk about, we use the curly braces and we use key value pairs, right? So what is an object literal? A data type that holds a collection of properties where each property is an association between a name, which is the key, and a value, right? So this is what it looks like. Curly brace, key, colon, value, comma, key, colon, value, comma, so on, right? So if we were to do something like this is what it would look like. So let's go ahead and create our object. We'll say, and we'll say, all right, now with this, within an object, it can hold all sorts of data types, right? So we've got a string, we've got a number, we've got a string, and we've got a string. And this, I mean, it could be a number, it could be a float. So, I mean, technically I'm 43.125 years of age, right? So I'm like 43 and an eighth at this point. And, but so it'll hold all different things. So like we could do an array in here, right? So I could say, it can also hold Boolean, so it has pets, true, right? And then we could say pet info, and we could create another object here, right? So we could say pet one, and we could then do an additional object in here, and we could say type cat name Todd, right? And then comma, and then we can say pet two type cat name Mo. And we could also do an array, so we could say favorite things, and then we could say puzzles, burritos, and say Audible books. All right. And so now if I were to take a look at this, if I say console.log and do person, so I'm going to look at this entire thing here. Right. And so here is the entire object. So key value, key value, key value, key value, key value, key value, right? And then within that, I also have a key and a value, and then a key value, right? So like these are nested objects. This is an array inside of my object. And so remember, objects have keys, arrays have index positions, all right? And so if I want to drill down into my object and get some nested information in here, I have to give it the key. And there's two different ways to do it. There's dot notation and there's bracket notation or box notation, right? So person.name. So the exact same thing is this, right? These will both do the same thing. All right. Now, what I recommend is when you are dealing with objects and you're creating your keys, behind the scenes, JavaScript stringifies all of your keys. All right. So even if I do a key say like 17 here, and then I do when, even though I wrote this as a number here, see how JavaScript automatically puts quotes around it and turns it into a string. So it basically behind the scenes, it stringifies all of the keys. Now, that being said, I am using I'm using camel case for all of my key names, just like if I was writing a variable or declare or naming a function. And I recommend you do this at all times. And the reason being is because it allows you to use dot notation or bracket notation without doing anything else. You can make your key an explicit string, right? So I could do and actually put a space in there, as long as it's wrapped in quotes, right? And if I do this and I run it, right, there is my explicit string, there is my key, and I can get there by going to, in quotes, explicit string, and if I run it, there is my value. But if I try and do this with dot notation, it will scream at me, right? And so as soon as I put that space in there, it's already telling me I have no idea what you're doing here, right? And I'll get an error message. And so when you're putting keys inside your object, it's a good idea to use camel case and not put any spaces in there. You can do it, but it does make things a little bit more difficult, and you can only do it in bracket notation. You can't do it with box or with the dot notation. And as far as if you want to use dot notation or box notation, I tend to use box notation, but you can use either. Just make sure that if you're using it within a problem, you're consistent. So if you're doing it one way, do it that way throughout the entire problem, and don't hop back and forth between the two, because it just makes things unnecessarily confusing. All right. And so let's go ahead and keep moving here. On object literal, keys and values do not have to just be string data types, they can be other data types as well, right? So here's another example of that. String, array, another object. So there's the key, there's your value. The value is another array. So let's use a simple object literal example. Okay, so how do we start accessing some of these things, right? So we talked about this, so we can use dot notation, we can use bracket notation, and we just give it the key and it will spit out the value, all right? So when in is used beside an object, it can check for containment against the existing keys, right? So we can also use in as a keyword here. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Oops, sorry. All right, so if we say console.log, we'll say age in person, and we get true. So notice how in turned blue, that's a protected word. It's actually doing an action that JavaScript assigned to it. And so it is checking to see if this key exists inside this object, right? So if I just put like a typo in here, that key doesn't exist, right? So I get false. And let's see here. This down now. Right, so we can also use the built-in method to do this, which is has own property, right? And so we could also do console.log. I believe we should be able to do, so object has own returns a Boolean true or false. So we could say something like person dot has own property. Right, so has own property will return a Boolean, and a property name determines whether an object has a property within the specified name. And so we could do pet info. Oops. Pet info is not defined. I put a typo here. Oh, sorry. I have to put that as a string. That's where I screwed up. So then we get true and true. All right, so right, and again, same thing. These both do the same thing. I don't care which one you use. If you need to use it multiple times in the same problem, just try and be consistent with it and use whichever one you're more comfortable using. All right, so object.keys, object.values, object.entries. All right, and so this one is a little bit different, right? So if I do console.log, let's say person.keys, and run it. So I get an error and it says person.keys is not a function. And so we kind of talked about this the other day. This is one of those ones where object.keys and then inside of person is what we're checking against. And there are all of the keys, right? And same thing here. If I do values, and notice how I'm getting all of the keys inside of an array, right? So there's my bracket notation there. And now I'm getting all of the values inside of an array. And if I do this one more time with entries, I believe I get the key and the values as nested arrays, right? And so down here, there is, so I've got my array, and then I've got my nested arrays right here. The first element is the key, the second element is the value, so on and so forth through the entire object. All right, and notice how it says object here. It's because the replet doesn't continue to dig down into the nesting. But it's still there. This is just the visual representation, so don't get thrown by that. All right, and so any questions on how we just kind of manipulated the object and then some of the built-in methods on it?
Are we gonna get a copy of these slides, or we just have to watch the video for
No,
this?
you should already have access to it. So within my drive, I've shared this link a couple of times now. And I'll share it again here. This is the slides as well as the links to all of the challenges.
Gotcha. Yeah, can you share that link one
Yep,
more?
I threw it in the Zoom chat, so it's in there.
Thank
Yep, but yeah, you can have there's a PDF of the slides available. You can refer back to the videos, you can have the slides, and if you've got any questions on anything, feel free to throw it out to me. Any other questions on objects? Okay, one other thing I wanted to show here real quick is, I kind of did this once last week as well, but does anyone want to take a shot at, how I would get to print out burritos in the console? So if I do console.log, and what would I have to type into my console.log as far as accessing my object and then also accessing my array to get burritos to print out over here? Right, so let's do this one step at a time. So if I hit run with person, I get the entire thing. So how would I get the favorite things?
If you do
Okay.
favorite thing,
Oh,
Sorry,
Yeah.
what was that?
Put favorite things in.
favorite thing, square brackets for everything,
Right, so that,
and then another square bracket, index 1.
yeah, and then another square bracket, and
The square
now I don't have a key, I need index position. So 0 and 1. Right, and now I've got burritos. And so that is how we access nested data. All right, and it would be the same thing, like if I wanted to do, if I wanted to get Todd's name, right? So I'd have to do person. And again, if you're not sure how to get there off the top of your head, don't take big bites. We're going to take small bites. So we're going to do person, because we know that gives it basically at the top level, I see the whole thing. And then I want to take my next step. So I know that I need to see my pet info, right? So I can do pet info. Right, so there's my pet info. I know Todd is pet number 1. Right, so now I'm looking at this object. If I want to get the name, I just have to give it one more, right, which is name. And so once you get comfortable with this, you'll be able to read it and say, okay, these are all the boxes I need to do. But if you're not sure if you're getting to where you need to be, don't type in all 3 boxes, hit run, then have it blow up and not be sure where you screwed it up. Do one level at a time, hit the run button, see what you get over here, right? Make sure that you're getting the output that you expect. Right, and same thing, you can do it with the, whoops, that. Right, so I could say person dot pet info. Right, so there's that. Dot pet 1. I'll do pet 2 this time. Right, and then dot type. So just like we nested with the bracket notation, we can nest with the dot notation as well. All right. Any other questions on how I just went through accessing my nested data? Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into a challenge. All right, and so we finished with SpaceX countdown on Thursday last week. So we're going to do remove zeros tonight, or we're going to start with remove zeros. So we'll go ahead and click on that. We're going to click on the fork and run. We're going to fork the replet, and we've got our own copy of it over here. All right, so let's take a look at the README. write a function that returns a number with all of the zeros removed from it. All right, and let's see, do we have examples over here? We don't. So let's go ahead and grab these. Excuse me. So we'll copy these, we'll paste them down here. Right, so grab this. Okay, so whoops. All right, there's my false, it's running. So let's talk about what we've got going on. So we are going to get one parameter that is a number that contains zeros in it. All right, return a number with all zeros removed. So all other digits should remain the same. All right, example, we can say see below. Now for pseudocode. All right, so same thing. First thing we're going to do is check to make sure our param is coming through. All right, so with this, I'm gonna try and not to ruin some of the surprises here. But okay, so with this, we're gonna check to make sure that our param is coming through. This isn't really a step. We're going to need to figure out how to isolate each digit of the number. And once we've done that, we will then want to determine if that number is a zero or non-zero number. If it is a zero, we will need to modify it. If it is not, or if it is non-zero, we will want to leave it alone. Once all of the zeros have been removed, we'll need to return the number without any zeros in it. So with this, it is 7:31. I think we'll do groups of 3 or 4 again with this one, and I'll probably give all of the teams until 8 o'clock to figure this one out. This one is going to be a little bit trickier than what it seems on the surface. And I'll give 2 hints here. So you cannot iterate through numbers, and you cannot mutate a string. All right, so these will be 2 stumbling blocks that you can run into that you'll have to figure out how to navigate while you're manipulating your data. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy and paste it into the Slack here, or I'm sorry, into the Zoom. So that's in the Zoom chat. Feel free to grab that. I'm going to stop the recording. All right, and everyone can see my screen, correct? Yes, no, thumbs
Yeah.
up.
Yes.
Cool. Excellent. All right. So we're going to do this one step at a time. So first things first, let's go ahead and take a look at our param to make sure that it's coming through. So we want number. Let's run it. Okay, so those look like numbers to me, so that's good. Now, the next thing I want to do is be able to identify or look at each number or each digit of this number individually. Now, we had talked about, actually, I don't know if we had talked about it or not. We may have covered, but didn't go into great depth, but there is dot split in JavaScript. And notice that is on string. All right, and so if I do the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog and I do a split with a string with an empty space in it, that means that I am takes a pattern and divides a string into an ordered list of substrings by searching for the pattern, puts these substrings into an array, and returns the array. So if I do it on a space, I'll have an array where each element is an individual word in the string. If I do it without a space, if I just do an empty string, I will do it on every single character, will become its own element in an array. The problem is, and I had said that you cannot iterate through numbers, so you cannot, you also cannot split a number, right? So if I do dot split here on an empty string, should yell at me and say that number dot split is not a function, which is true because it is a number still and it is not a string. So the first step would be, how do I convert a number to a string in JS? All right, so a couple of different things here. Where is the MDN one? Why isn't it showing up on the first page of results? MDN, anything? Okay, number dot prototype to string. That's what I was looking for. All right, so if I do, and I don't need the radix in here, I'm just going to give it to string, and a method of number value returns a string representing the number value. So let's go ahead and start here. So before I even do my split, I need to do number dot to string. And let's run this and see what we get. All right, so now instead of getting these gold numbers, I know I'm getting string representations of it. So now I can come back in here, and now that I have a string, I know that I can split it. Right, and so if I do it with just a empty string in there, that means I'm going to split on every character. Right, and so there's my array where each character or each number or each digit is basically now its own element in the array, and they're string representations of the numbers. All right, so this looks good to me. So let's go ahead and peel this out of the console, and we'll say let r, or we'll say array of number equal this, right? And just to make sure we didn't change anything, we console.log array of number, right? We get the same thing, so we're good there. So now what I would need to do is iterate through each of these characters, each of these elements, right? And make a decision. If it is a 0, we need to modify it. If it's a non-zero, we just need to leave it alone, right? And so now we could say for let I equal 0, I less than array of number dot length I plus plus. And so now let's go ahead and take a look at this, and we could say console.log array of number I. Right, so remember, arrays get accessed by their index value. We're going to start at 0, so the first pass through, this will be array of number bracket 0, bracket 1, 2, so on until we hit all of the elements in there. All right, so now we see each of those being printed out on their own line. So we're getting each number individually on its own. Right, and so now the next step would be is I need to use some conditional logic to find out if this is a 0 or if it's a non-zero number. So I could say if we'll say array of number I, and we'll say triple equals. And what do I want this to be triple equal to? Do I want it to be 0 or do I want it to be 0? Anyone want to take a guess at that?
0. 0 with the quotation marks.
Yep, so I want it to be triple equal to the string representation of 0, because if I do 0, and I've already converted these to strings, this will never be true. Even when it's this, that will still resolve to false. So I need to be on the lookout for the string representation. Right, and so now in here, let's go ahead and only, for right now, I'm not gonna do an else statement. I'm just gonna do my if statement. And we're only going to print it out if it's a 0. And so that way we know we're hitting our case there. Right, so I'm only printing out the zeros. And now that I have a string, I cannot mutate it, so I cannot change this to something else, but I can reassign the value, right? So I can't change the 0 to something else, but what I can do is take this value, this variable, and reassign it to this. All right, and so now if I come down here and I get outside of my for loop, and I look at array of number again. All right, so now I've got 1 empty string 1, 5 empty string 6, 8 empty string 1 and 9. So how do I join single string? Right, and it is join, right? So I need dot join. There's the MDN. So the join method of an array instance creates a return of a new string by concatenating all of the elements in this array separated by commas or a specified separator string. If the array has only one item, then that item will be returned without using the separator. All right, so if I just run dot join with nothing in it, right, so right here we'll do dot join. There's my string. Notice I'm out of my array, but I've got some commas in there. So I need to give it no separator, basically an empty string again, just like when we split, and then we'll get nothing, right? So there's 11, there's 5, 6, 8, 1, 9, right? And so there is my numbers without the zeros. If I return this now, right? So right now I'm just console.logging. If I return it, and let's go ahead and hit return, right? I still get false, false. Anyone want to take a stab at why?
Because it's not a number.
Right, because it's not a number. We're still returning strings here. Anyone know how to take this and turn it into a number? To force JavaScript to make it a number.
Is it parse int?
Yep, parse int, the unary operator, right? So we could do a plus symbol here. We could do parse int, which is my preferred method because we're being explicit and we're telling whoever is reading this code exactly what we're doing. Right? True, true. All right, so we solved the problem. Now, notice here, we did do some chaining of this, and this is a perfectly acceptable solution. If I were to write this, say at like the production level, I would probably wouldn't have the for loop and I wouldn't have the if statement in here. I'd probably write something that looks a little bit more like this. So we could say let remove zeros. I'm just going to comment this out here real quick. And let's go ahead and do this. We'll do number. Oops. What did I do here? Oh, I didn't comment that out. So that was blowing up. No zeros is not defined. Did I have a typo here? I sure do. There's no E in there. How about now? There we go. All right, so I could do dot toString dot split. All right, let's take a look at this and see what we've got. So there's that and that. And because I am going to chain these together, what I'm going to do is this. So even though I'm hitting enter and I'm moving them down to another line, this make it nice and clean here. Right, so even though I'm spreading this out a little bit, JavaScript is still going to read that as it's all on one line, one thing right after the other. All right. So now that I've split and I want to iterate through here, so this would be something where, and again, if I did this as a for each, and let's call this digit, and I say digit is triple equal to string 0. If so, if that's true, I just want it to be an empty string. If not, I just want it to stay digit. Right? And I do this and I run this, I get undefined. Right? And let's take a look at this over here. So if I say dot for each, so the for each method array instance executes a provided function once for each array element. Right? But what's the return value? None. It's undefined. So let's take a look at map over here. And what does map do? So map return value a new array with each element being the result of the callback function, right? And so our callback function is saying, look at each individual digit, and if it is triple equal to string 0, make it an empty string. If not, just assign it the same value, right? So if we change that from for each to dot map, and this is why I always say, like, get comfortable with those for loops first, because there are some wrinkles in here. Now we've got the same thing, right? And so now, same thing, I hit enter again, I say dot join. Let's run it. Right, so now we're back there. And so we can take this out of the console.log and we'll say return parse int. True, right? So this is doing the exact same thing as this, but we're just chaining all of our built-ins together, right? And this is what I say is we want to get comfortable with the basic building blocks, knowing that I need to iterate, doing some conditional logic, right? So I've got my if statement here, and then I'm joining everything back together. That could also be broken down into something that looks like this. Any questions on how I solved this either way?
So do companies want to see the shortest code you can possibly do for whatever problem?
Not necessarily. So what companies want during an interview process versus what Code Platoon is looking for on the application, which is like what we're working with right now, it does not matter. You would get the same amount of points either way. And when you get to an interview, that this may be preferable over this, but if you're not, like, if you struggle or you get stuck trying to write a callback function inside of a dot map, or like get confused between a dot map and a dot for each, where you could have just flown through it with a for loop, they would rather see this working than see you fail with something like this, right? So the most important thing is that you get the working answer. Kevin?
Okay, so my question is a little high level. So let's say this is a challenge, right? And I'm on here and I didn't have any idea what I was looking for. And I'm like, as I see the the pseudocode and I just start and I Google, right? And I like what methods, that's fine, right? I can say which method removes zeros or how to how do we say it? How to, how it's okay for us to break it down how it makes sense to us if we're getting to the problem.
Yes, that's why I'm showing, like, I don't need to Google any of this stuff to answer this question.
Right. I know you don't, of course not.
Right? But the reason I am Googling this stuff is so that you're seeing the questions that I'm asking Google, because those are the questions you should be asking Google.
Right. Okay.
Right. So, and I'm not like trying to flex like, oh, I don't need to Google any of this stuff because I live on Google and I pry into chat GPT daily, right? Like I do not know all of the answers. I know the answers to these because this is the 10th time I've done this question, right? But why I'm taking it, like, I could have just wrote this from start to finish without explaining anything, but that doesn't help anyone.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to do when I'm doing all of this is I'm teaching you what you should be doing while you're learning this, right? Like this is not for my benefit. Like you should be doing the pseudocode. I 5 years in, I still write down pseudocode in notes before I undertake a new challenge. If I don't know how to fix, like if I don't know the problem off the top of my head, I will grab another senior developer and I will have a planning session with them. And we'll talk about like how we're going to tackle this and where are the pitfalls, where are the good ideas, the bad ideas, right? Like when you start a challenge on CoderByte, you should be doing your prep work, right? Like you should be writing all of this stuff down and figuring out like how you're going to do it, because if you get lost while you're going through here, you can always refer back to this. This is also giving you steps of when you should be writing your code. And my pseudocode also is fairly light because I'm also trying not to just like give you the blatant answers, right? Like I could have said, like I said, like you can't iterate through numbers, right? So, but I didn't write down like you need to change your number to a string, otherwise you're never going to get it into an array, right? And same thing like that, you can't mutate a string. I didn't say that like you're going to have to reassign it. Like that's how I would write my pseudocode down if I was trying to solve this myself for real. But like I'm trying to do a balancing act of making it so that I'm giving you guidance, but that you're still going out there and having to look some of this stuff up. And then when I solve the problem, I'm absolutely like taking it step by step. How if I were approaching a new algorithm challenge and I didn't know what was going on, like this is how I would solve it, right? And that's how you should be tackling these as well. Hitting that
Now,
button all the time, doing it making one change at a time, not trying to do all of it at once. So like these are just good habits that I'm trying to drill into everyone.
one quick thing about that. So with your pseudocode, I'm kind of assuming that the person who wrote the pseudocode kind of know exactly what they're looking for. What I'm doing is when I work through these things, I have a very simplified what I'm doing, and I'm building the pseudocode as I Google. But I don't know the answer. I don't know exactly what it's asking me all the steps beforehand. That's fine too, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's if you don't know the answer to it, but I mean, like, and so this is hard right now because you don't know the syntax and you don't know how to apply it's like, and I'm not like trying to say this in a mean way, but like
Yeah.
we're all brand new. I was the same way. Like
Right.
there was a point in my career where I didn't know if I should today. Like I also you'll never get away from trying to figure out what is the best data structure to use in a situation. And there's multiple ways to do this. Like I could have done this with an object, but the best way was probably to use an array. And if you're not comfortable on when to use an array, when to use an object, like it makes it harder to get into the pseudocode, right? But like the pseudocode should be like, like if I was writing this to solve it, like, hey, I've got a number. I know I'm going to need to get this into an array somehow so I can look at each individual string. That means, or like each individual digit. So that means that I'm going to have to convert my number to a string, which means that I'm eventually going to have to convert it back. I know that once I have a string, like I could technically iterate through my string, but because my string is immutable, it's like I can't get rid of the zeros that way. So I need to split it out into each individual element into an array. Then I need to write a loop to iterate through my array. I'm going to need to write a conditional check that grabs the zeros and turns them into an empty string, because I know that when I do a join on empty strings, it's automatically going to get rid of them. And I mean, even to the point where like I could probably like make this even quicker. Like if I were to look at this in like a second pass, now I think about it because I can join on something, I could probably even do, let's see if this works. So I got my split. Let me cut this out. And then let's join on the string of 0. Let's see what that gives me. No, false. But basically, like there's different things that I can do with this to like I would make this a little bit more verbose, and I'm going to use what I know when I'm writing up my pseudocode, and the things I don't know, I'll write in all caps, or I'll bold it and know that like I'm gonna have to do a Google search there, right, to get through it. That bugs me though, because that should have worked. Back here. Looks like I got lots of zeros. Suturing. I think if I split on 0. And then join on that. How about that? Right, so there is that. I'm console.logging it instead of returning it. Right, so I could make it even easier here just by thinking about it a little bit more. Right, there's my true truth. So I don't even have to turn it to an empty string, right? Like I just, so get in there, split it on the zeros, join it back together on everything, like better solution. And so I could probably even pull this all up to one line at this point. Right, and so that does the same thing as this. We cut the iteration out of it. Like I don't have the dot map anymore. We just split on the right character. So, and again, the other part of this too, and what I tell everyone, I tell apprentices at my current job or junior developers, make it work, then make it pretty. Give me a working solution. And then once you have a working solution, you understand why it's working, then we can start looking at ways to make it work better, make it prettier, make it less lines of code, make it more efficient. But the most important, like, you can give me the most efficient thing on the face of the planet that breaks, isn't as good as something that's clunky that works every single time. Okay, so it's 8:26. Let's go ahead and squeeze in one more challenge here. And sorry, any other questions before I move on to the next challenge? Okay, so next one is going to be alphabet code. And probably what I'll do with this one is we'll start it and I'll give you another half hour or so to work on this one. And then we'll probably go over the actual solution to this one as a class on Wednesday at the start of class. Because this one will be another, like you see, they're getting a little bit tougher as we go each time. All right, so write a method that takes in an uppercase letter of the alphabet as a string and returns the integer corresponding to its place in the alphabet. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. All right, so we're getting one param, which is a string with a single character. And we are all right. Excuse me. So here's this. I'm gonna grab it. We've still got the screen sharing is still enabled, so I'm sorry I sent everyone out into that without it. Sorry, let me just, there's the meeting group, drop that in the Zoom. Also been dropping it in Slack if you need it. Same rules apply. If you need me, message me. If you finish early, message me. I'm gonna shake up the teams here. All right, and let's see here. It looks like we've got a couple of people drop, so let me do this. I will reduce the number of rooms. Slightly larger teams. All right, so I'm going to open, is there any other questions for me before I open up the breakout room? All right, I'm gonna let this one go till about 8:55. So it's about 24 minutes. If you need anything, let me know. We'll come back into class. We'll see how everyone did with it, and then we'll plan on going over the solution to this one on Wednesday. All right, here we go. All right, everyone, welcome back from the alphabet code challenge. Christopher, I think you said you had a question.
Yes. Now, my solution was going to be a long one. I was thinking, well, first I was thinking an if statement per letter, like if letter equals A, if letter equals B, whatever, go down the list and then return from either 1 through 26. But when I did that, the first line it said it was true, but the last two, so I only did A, B, and Z, and it said the last two it says false. It does the function only reads the first line for if statements, and then if it's true, and they cancel everything else out, or
Right, so with an if statement, and we'll talk more about this when we get to FizzBuzz. But when you do an if else statement, or like an if else statement, and you could have done a bunch of individual if statements, or you could have done an if statement and then 25 like else if statements. The first statement that it goes into, that is the only one that it will go into.
okay. So
So
what it will be a while loop with the if statements. If I was going to do the if statements,
no, wouldn't need a while loop because you're only getting one letter at a time. Right, so it can only be one of those. Right, so it's not like you're getting a string with 5 letters in it and find it for multiples like that. You would need a loop to iterate to repeat that check if you had multiple letters, but with one letter you wouldn't need a loop.
Gotcha. Okay.
But there's definitely a better way to handle it than a bunch of chained if statements, using a couple of different data structures. And so or data types, and we'll talk about that Wednesday. We'll go over kind of like the messiest solution to the easiest solution using different data types. And so like we could solve this using a string, we could solve this using an array, we could solve this using an object. And
Gotcha.
without having to do any if or like any like iteration or anything like that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Did anyone else have any other questions for me? Okay, so it's about 8:58, 8:59. We'll call this the official end of class. So we'll see everyone on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time. I'm going to stop the recording for the evening, but I've still got a couple of minutes to hang out if anyone else has got any other questions for me.